Guys, I want to take on a kind of fun and edgy topic today, which is what is circling good for and what isn't it? I think a lot of us in the circling world tend to use it like a catch-all tool. Any nail that we run into can be solved with the hammer of circling. And while circling is an amazing relational practice, I think it's actually not good for everything. So I want to talk a little bit about what I think it is good for and where I think other tools in your toolbox may be more helpful. So let's start with the stuff it's good for, because it's my practice and I want to talk it up, much as I like pointing out paradox. So things it's good for. One thing, obviously, connection. So, what circling gives us fundamentally is the kind of intimacy that usually we get after long-term contact with people, like our friends and our family, when we can talk about, what is it that I appreciate about you? And what is the sense of the connection between us? And who am I really? And who are you? One of my teachers likes to say that usually the only time where we get that honest is when the relationship is ending. What actually happened and what were all the things I wish I had said and the things that bugged me about you and all of that. So there's really deep connection available when those are our everyday conversations, and circling opens up a space where intimacy is readily available and safe to practice because you know things are going to get cleaned up if they get opened. It's also really good at founding community because of that. People want to do this ongoingly. They want to continue connecting with people. So connection is huge. Another one is transformation. We talk about circling as not a goal-oriented practice or not focused on healing, but there actually is a lot of transformation that comes from it. When you're getting feedback from other people about how you show up, when you're noticing different parts of your experience, some of us are normally mostly in our minds, and circling challenges us to be in our bodies and our emotions, or if you're more in your emotions, you get to your body and your mind. It's very integrated as a practice, and it also goes deeper into things that maybe we usually only touch on in our life. So there's a lot of transformation possible, and conversely, also a lot of self-acceptance, because the way circling works is by saying, hey, you're okay the way you are. You make sense. If anyone else had been you, they would have done the exact same things. You're basically self-congruent as an organism, whether or not you're congruent with society. So there's something that's actually very relieving about that. And then, from that place, you can choose whether or not you want to change. And I really like that dichotomy, actually. Other things, communication skills. When we actually have to own our experience, speak from ourselves, be curious about other people, empathize, notice, what's happening in us, call out subtexts, notice body language. All of these skills are things that circling trains. I've become much better at conversation and connection since starting circling. I'm still anxious, but now anxiety is part of my experience rather than overwhelming. And I have a lot of skills that I can fall back on when I get stuck. Also, it's really good for spiritual connection. There's something that happens in a circle that's really unique where we slow down and we tap into this experience of shared humanity that feels almost transcendent, bigger than any of us. And whether it's actually connection to something bigger or just a shared experience of being human, I think personally that spirituality, the feeling of spirituality is noticing something much smaller or much larger than us. And an experience of shared humanity is larger than any of us. Circling gives us that. For me, the first experiences I've had with spirituality have been through circling. Organically, I didn't set out for it, but it's kind of hard to ignore. And two more. One is clarity. When we actually look more deeply into what we're feeling, what's really being said between us, what's underneath the things that are being said, what are our motivations and contexts, and what do we even mean by the words that we're speaking, it can provide a lot of clarity, especially relationally and also personally. And based on that, the other thing it's good for is conflict mediation. I took a course in conflict mediation in college, and it was basically circling, bounded by telling the story at the beginning of what's happening and negotiating a resolution at the end. The rest was circling and getting really good at it. So it's good at clearing conflicts and finding out what's going on and having people get each other's world around it. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that circling is good for. now let's talk a little bit about what it isn't good for, where maybe you're using the wrong hammer and you actually need a screwdriver or like, I don't know, a plushy ball or something. Um, One thing it's not great at is balance, basically. Like, I can circle all day long, and at some point, I'm still gonna need to get up, move my body, get lunch, like, do something else. Um, Circling is also not gonna usually make me a lot of money. It's not gonna replace my job. Circling is a very present moment practice, and while it may give me clarity on things that I need to work on in myself to do my job better, it doesn't necessarily get me to get up and do the productive things. Like, a lot of the time my work is going to be focused on the future, and it's going to be like doing things that I don't always want to do, like filming videos, which has taken me months to get myself to do. And I got circled lots on it, and I noticed all my blocks, and that was wonderful. And I still had to like go to a work immersion with a bunch of entrepreneur friends to get myself to actually pull out my computer and turn it on like this. So in Integral, there are these quadrants of body, mind, spirit, and shadow. And I think circling is really good, especially at the spirit and shadow parts. And it doesn't necessarily always address the body and mind as much. So having a physical practice, having a work practice, an intellectual practice, even having other spiritual and shadow practices can be really helpful. And related to that, circling isn't very good at solving problems. So a lot of the time in circles, I get to the point with someone where, okay, like, we see the things that are contributing to the pain that they're feeling. Like, okay, like they're in a situation that really doesn't work for them, and there are multiple values going on. Like, maybe they're in a relationship and they want freedom and self-expression. And at the same time, they like love the stability and intimacy in the relationship, and like they're seeing both parts and it's really clear, and yet nothing's shifting. Because circling like can help us see each other and ourselves more deeply, but it doesn't necessarily cause something to shift that's actually against the value of the practice to try to cause something to change. And there's a place where if you want change, you might need to shift into something like coaching or just accountability or just making a decision. And circling can't always help with that. So if you feel that stuckness, that kind of like, well, I see everything, but it still hasn't changed. There's this quote that you can't solve a problem at the same level at which it was created. Circling, a lot of the time we're seeing inside the level at which something is created. And yeah, we can give outside perspectives, but that's not necessarily going to solve the problem for you, because a lot of the time outside perspectives don't land as much. Like, I can share what I see in you, but you really have to experience it from the inside out, and you have to choose that. And oftentimes that means changing your situation to do so. So that's another thing. Another thing circling is not good for is making other people understand you. So when people come out of circles, they're like, sweet, I want to use this with my boss. I want to use it with my mom. I want to use it with my grandma. And it's great. Like, you can get their worlds a lot more. You can understand them in ways that you never have and have better communication because of it. You can join them in their world, but you can't necessarily make them join you in yours. They may still not want to empathize. You may spend all day getting what's true for them and loving them in it, and they may never say a word about what they get about you or what they appreciate about you. So sometimes you just have to decide what you want in an interaction and what boundaries you're going to stick to, and commit to a connection that may look more like not talking or talking only in a certain way. There are some relationships where I think we have to decide how much of ourselves we're willing to show, because the other person can only accept so much. And I think that is one of the beauties of circling, is it's a place where we can just bring more of ourselves and have the experience of being seen. And there's a release in that, especially if you spend most of your day only bringing part of yourself. And the last thing that circling isn't great for can be ongoing intimacy. There's like the space that we get to in circles is so deep and connected, and I can look in someone's eyes and feel like I fall in love with them. And it's beautiful. And if I'm going to maintain the connection outside of that, I have to work at it. I have to be willing to message that person and say, hey, let's hang out. I also have to be willing for them to be somebody different than they are in the circle. Like, maybe we meet in the circle and we have a soul connection, but outside of that, like, they're a conservative Christian and I'm a liberal Jew, and, you know, they work a 9-to-5 job and I travel around the world teaching facilitation. We're going to have to work really hard if we want to maintain a connection, and maybe we do, and maybe we just want to connect at that soul level, but we're going to have to work at it, and we're going to have to try to understand parts of each other. It's like any sort of relationship. intimacy is something that has to be maintained outside of the moment if you want it to turn into friendship. And this is actually one of the places that I'm most interested in, is where does moment connection turn into something longer and enduring, and what are the cycles of that in community and in friendship? So that's a little breakdown, and I would be super curious to hear your thoughts on all of this.